Hey guys, my name is Brandon and welcome to or welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you like what you see in here, you're more than welcome to hit the subscribe button so you stay notified every time I upload a new video. Okay, let's get straight on with today's video. Hey everyone and welcome back to Is That More Brandon. So in today's video I'm going to be doing a review for the 5th episode of the Traitors series 2. Okay, we are almost halfway through. Well, actually, no, that's a lie. We're nowhere near halfway through. Halfway through the episodes that I can watch as of now. And we obviously found out that at the beginning of the episode, it was either going to be Paul or Meg who were going to be murdered, because obviously Andrew had won the shield. The players decided to save him. Ash was banished at the Traitors round table. And yeah, only Paul or Meg were going to get murdered. Little did the players know, obviously Paul was a traitor, so the only person that could be murdered by the traitors was Meg, because traitors can't murder traitors. So Meg was murdered, and yeah, Paul's kind of situation here, he basically said, sometimes it is quite sad that the levels you have to go in terms of like getting people out of the game, but at the same time, it is part of the game and you just have to do what you have to do. Obviously when they got Ash out and they all went back to the house, Charlie basically said the traitors are not laughing anymore because obviously they finally got one of their people out. And Paul basically said that he did share genuine emotion, and obviously he had a little cry with Johnny, and he just managed to shape it in a different way. So yes, he is sad, he's not at home with his family and his kids and whatever else he was crying about, but he kind of shaped it so it looked as if he was a faithful. And then Johnny basically said, look, fingers crossed for you tonight. I kind of would like you to go because then I'll become the most popular player, and then kind of jokes and said, no, I don't really want that to happen. Tracy said that she felt like the traitors may have shot themselves in the foot if Paul is gone, because then it's quite obvious that Meg's the traitor. And Andrew said that nobody seems to be looking at Johnny. He's just very loud, very, talkative and whatever, and then as soon as it comes to the round table, he goes quiet. So Johnny was a name that was kind of thrown around before briefly by Ross, for example, but yeah, it wasn't really a name that people have been bringing up. Meg also said to the camera that she's not mentally ready for her journey to be over at the moment. And Jazz then had a chat with Paul, and he basically just was like to Jazz, let's put a line under it, like our disagreement or whatever. And you could see at this point Evie was just looking over at the two of them with like a bit of a confused face. So yeah, it's a bit weird because Jazz doesn't trust Paul. I don't presume Paul trusts Jazz either. Obviously Paul knows Jazz isn't a traitor, but Evie was looking over. So maybe if Evie, Charlie and Jazz, 3 people who potentially think Paul is a traitor, come together, they can then in numbers get him out, but we don't know if that's going to ever be a thing. It didn't definitely happen in episode 5, I know that for a fact because I've watched it all. And then obviously Paul had a little chat with the traitors, and yeah, he basically said, look, mission accomplished. Ash was the weakest in the dungeon, and she kind of wasn't really playing her role very well. And Harry basically said the heat could now be on Paul, because obviously he's going to come back to breakfast, Meg isn't. So they're going to think, well, hang on, why did they save Paul over Meg? Or did Paul save himself, or whatever? That's the only 2 options. Either if Paul comes back, he murdered Meg, or if Paul comes back, why would the traitors save him over Meg? So it's one of those 2 things, because obviously he's a popular character, so you would presume, now he's in danger, that they would get rid of him. So yeah, we found out obviously Meg was murdered by the traitors. At breakfast time, everyone was obviously coming in. Diane said to Andrew, obviously it was probably glad for him to now be back with everyone at breakfast, because now he's got decent food. Anthony said that they've already got a traitor, and that person was actually not even on his radar of being a traitor. Andrew said that if Meg is the traitor, then Paul's going to come back. And Evie said that if Paul comes back, does that mean he's automatically a traitor? And Miles basically said it feels like he's put Paul, it feels like Paul's put himself in the firing line. Zach said to a little group of them that if Paul comes back, he's a traitor. Paul walked through the door. Everyone was shocked, as in like, Meg's gone. Like, everyone was so sure that Meg was a traitor. So either secretly Paul is a traitor and he's got her out, or they're both faithful and they're both just not, the game isn't being played in the way that everyone thinks the game was going to be played. And then I think he said, oh, so close, as if like, oh gosh, I almost got removed from the game. Meg obviously then received her letter, and she basically, was told that she was banished or eliminated from the game. And she said maybe she was a little bit more observant than Paul, she wasn't really chatting much, and maybe the traitors felt like they needed to get rid of her, so she was out of the game. Evie was like, oh my goodness, Meg was a faithful. And she basically said that she feels like Paul is a traitor, but she's in the minority. So you already have Jazz, who doesn't really trust Paul. You now have Charlie, who 100% trusts Paul. You have Charlotte, who 100% trusts Paul. But now you've got Evie, who also thinks that Paul's maybe not telling the truth. So she and Jazz need to have a chat and start getting their numbers up. The next mission was called Fired Up. And Anthony said this was the key day for them to get rid of another traitor. Charlotte said she was happy that Paul was back and she definitely trusted him 100%. And then Paul was having a chat with Harry, Charlie and Johnny. And obviously Paul was a bit like, well, I don't really know how to feel. Johnny said everyone's suspicious of everyone, and Charlie told Paul not to think too much about the situation. Miles said that obviously there were a few people who still thought Paul was a traitor, so his aim was trying to just deter them from Paul, but not be too like, no, it's definitely not Paul, because then if Paul does get eliminated and he's a traitor, then it's Miles who goes under the bus. And he'll basically have got rid of himself from the game, and then that's another traitor, and then they know, oh my goodness, they were working together the whole game. Ross was having a chat with Jazz, Jasmine and Charlie. They were kind of all discussing names of who they thought was a traitor. So Ross still thought Johnny. Jasmine said she's probably not sure, but she doesn't think it's Paul. And Charlie said that Paul just looks a bit worried. And Jazz kind of said to the three girls, well, he said to the two girls and Ross, maybe it's a double bluff with Paul. Maybe he wants us to think that he's a faithful when he's actually a traitor, or, you know, giving off traitory vibes, but then, like, he wants us to think that he's not a traitor, but then he actually is. So one of those things. Charlie left the conversation because she said it was getting a bit warm, and then Jazz basically said to Ross and Jasmine, he said, look, I'm not sure how Paul got away with this situation. He's a cool guy, but he is a traitor. He's not looking at me, not giving me eye contact, and if Jazz was to get murdered at midnight, that at least Ross and Jasmine now have intel that Jazz thinks Paul is the traitor. He just said he's not really at a stage where he feels like he wants to bring it up, because again, he doesn't want to put a name forward and then, you know, he gets eliminated and then his way of thinking can't then be shared further on. It will just be like cut at a dead end, and then they're all back to square one. And Ross basically said, well, actually, now is the time to bring it up. He said, look, if you don't speak up and throw another name in the round table, he will just keep knocking people out. People will not be brave enough to point a finger at Paul, and then he'll surprisingly or whatever get all the way to the end. Diane and Ross were having a chat, basically saying, like, they need to get Johnny out. He's a little bit too intuitive. And Harry tried to deflect the situation off of Johnny by saying he's got a good connection with him. And obviously, because they're in a similar military industry, he kind of doesn't want to lose his bro, like his man. So yeah, he basically was just trying to say, like, I don't think it's Johnny. Like, you know, I feel like he might be a bit suspicious, but that's probably just his personality and just the industry that obviously he works in or that he's been part of. And then in terms of the actual mission itself, so all the players went out and they had to build a catapult, find pieces along the way. They had to use the sledge, almost like Santa's sleigh, and use the shopping list to obviously know what pieces they needed and what was to go where. All they needed to do was fire the golden cannonball in 90 minutes, and they would win £10,000 added to the prize pot. Claudia Winkleman also explained that there were 5 shield cannonballs, so whoever gets the shield cannonball would all go against each other to fire 1 more cannonball, and whoever got the closest to the bullseye would then win a shield for themselves for that evening. So, Andrew and Paul actually helped Tracy get across the river. There was a river with some stones, obviously a bit difficult, a bit treacherous for some of the older ones, but you know, you had a lot of the guys helping getting the ladies through. Charlie said it was quite difficult for her. She actually found from a young age that she was actually moderately deaf, so being in these kind of games and situations where there's just so much going on, she just said it was just a bit too much for her, but she still managed to get through the game, and she said she wasn't really doing well, but she was still there, she was still helping out, so, you know, she did what she could do. I think later on during the challenge, there was a couple of ammos, so shield ammos. So the shield ammos didn't mean you got a shield, it just meant you had a chance to fight for a shield later on. So Molly felt like she was at risk, and I think someone kind of just said to her, go on, you grab one, so she grabbed the shield ammo, and she took that to the end. And then Harry basically said that him and Molly are both young, dumb and fun, and he wouldn't want to see her go from the game, so, you know, I think he's the one that kind of pushed her to get that the shield ammo. When they got to the end, they were still using the sledge to kind of drag it up the hill, and obviously if you've got a sledge with lots of heavy stuff and you've got 14, 15 people trying to drag it up, that's not going to be great. So he just said, leave the sledge, grab the stuff, and let's just walk up the hill. So obviously this is his military background coming into action here. He's telling everyone, we don't need the sledge, it's going to be too heavy. Grab something that you think you can carry it to the top. We'll come back until all the stuff's up to the top. And then Ross, Jasmine, and Harry were all having a chat. And I think Jasmine said to Ross that he should grab a shield just in case, just because I feel like there potentially is a target on his back. And then I guess at that point, if Ross does say something that's a little bit outspoken at the round table, unless everyone gets rid of him, he's then safe from murder that evening. So yeah, Molly and Ross were the only two that grabbed the shield ammo at that point. Miles said that obviously when they were building the catapult, that people kind of just nominated him as the leader. He's not really like a builder or whatever, and he kind of just, I guess because he has a loud voice or because he's confident, he just naturally was put forward to help build the catapult. And they all volunteered Charlie to actually fire the catapult as well. So she was really happy, really, you know, giggling and like, oh, I'm surprised they all volunteered me. And then she said just before she catapulted it that this is for Bristol. I'm presuming that's where she's from. It was over to then Molly and Ross to also then shoot a catapult each. Whoever got closest to the bullseye would get the shield. Ross basically got the bullseye. Molly kind of missed. So it was Ross that was actually saved from murder that evening. When they all got back to the house, Molly basically said to Paul it was nice to have him here, and Anthony said that there were one or two things for him that are a little bit questionable about Zach, and Zach kept trying to like interrupt, like I guess that you have to fight for yourself and you have to defend yourself, but Zach basically said, look, Anthony, you voted for me without even having a reason. And then Anthony said, well actually Harry voted for you as well, it wasn't just me and Harry both voted for you on the same day. And then Zach said, well actually, me and Harry have had a chat about that, we're fine now. So Anthony was kind of bringing up old news, but also trying to get a point across, but he kind of wasn't being listened to. So that conversation kind of just ended and he just was like, I'm not even going to bother talking. Anthony then had a chat with Ross saying a traitor went yesterday and a faithful has gone today. And they basically kind of just agreed with each other that there was some sort of suspicion around Paul. And that obviously he has to understand that there's going to be two narratives of what potentially could have happened. Either he's the traitor, he saved himself, put the blame on someone like Meg, or get rid of Meg, and the faithfuls or the traitors have saved Paul for whatever reason when they see him as a threat because he's the most popular character. So yeah, he said he might survive at the table, but he might not survive the night, depending on whatever he says, if someone he's talking about is actually the traitor. And then Jasmine was talking to Anthony. No, Jasmine was talking about Anthony, saying that he was on her radar, and Johnny was sitting right next to her. She also said, look, Johnny, I think you're also suspicious as well. Again, a similar situation with Anthony and Zach. Johnny didn't really let Jasmine speak, so she kept trying to say something, and he kept just interrupting her, so she couldn't really get her point out. But she basically said that she feels like Johnny's very quiet. Johnny said, well, I'm actually more vocal than other people if I'm, you know, putting names and things out there. And then Paul basically said it feels like everyone's on edge a little bit. So Jasmine kind of just looked over at him and Johnny as if like, okay, this is a little bit weird. So maybe people think Paul and Johnny are working together because they are always hanging out with each other. So at least one of them has to be a traitor. Johnny knows it's not him. Paul knows it's not Johnny. Paul knows it's himself, but he's acting as if he's a faithful. And then, yeah, so obviously when it came to the round table, Johnny was the first person who kind of attacked. So Ross went straight for Johnny and basically said, look, there are three things about you that are given off traitor behaviour. Firstly, everyone looked at Ash at the round table because she was quiet. And obviously, outside of the round table, she was quite confident, quite loud, quite bubbly. Same situations happened with Johnny. He also said that he threw his name and Jasmine's name under the bus when obviously it's not them. And that he's obviously quite quiet when it comes to talking about traitors and, you know, bringing it up in conversations and things like that. And then Johnny basically said, well, why am I saying names if I'm not vocal? So very good comeback, because actually that's a good point. If he's so quiet, how is he getting involved in all these conversations? And he said that he does give honest answers and he obviously doesn't want to accuse people. So he's going to say, I think this person's a traitor, I think that person's a traitor. But without the evidence, you can't just attack someone, because then if you are attacking a traitor, they'll get you out. And if you're attacking a faithful, they'll also try and get you out as well. Again, Miles jumped in and said he feels like Zach. It's not a popular opinion at the moment that Zach's a traitor, but he's going to back his own opinion and just kind of put that name out there. Anthony then discussed the dungeon situation. So he basically said, well, Andrew got a shield, Ash got banished, and Meg got murdered. And no traitor has knocked Paul out, even though the traitors are aware now that Paul is the most popular character. So surely the traitors will have got rid of Paul. And he basically said it's either a double bluff, that he is coming across as a faithful but he's a traitor, or he genuinely is a faithful from the evidence that he's collected so far. So a very brave thing for Anthony to do, because he doesn't know that well, I guess he doesn't know that Paul's a traitor, but kind of has inklings that he is. But this could kind of go back on him, and then Anthony could kind of get himself murdered in the evening. Paul basically, well, Paul didn't really say anything at first, and then Jazz, again, someone else who also has that same kind of opinion, said, is there anything you have to say to that, Paul? Paul basically said, well, it's obviously a bit awkward coming back to breakfast, everyone's staring at you when you come in last, and he got a little bit teary and said, you know, it's really upsetting, like, I'm thinking about my family and my kids and things like that, so, you know, it's a bit of a difficult situation, and even I'm a bit confused as to why I was saved. But I'm not really sure like what else I can say or whatever. So he kind of deflected it a little bit, but was able to manage to get the blame off of him as being a traitor, because then it went on to the next conversation with Zach saying, actually, Anthony, I think you're a traitor, because he basically said Anthony tiptoes around questions, redirects questions, and again, it was that similar situation of Zach was trying to say his piece, Anthony kept trying to jump in, but then actually when Anthony was speaking, Zach also tried to jump in as well, and Anthony was like, no, this is my time to speak, like, you've had your time, it's my time to speak, traitor or not. If someone's speaking, you don't interrupt them, you may just say, is it okay if I just jump in, but you don't just start talking over them, because then you're having two people talk at the same time, and then that shows traitor vibes from potentially two people. Anyway, when it came down to the votes, Zach got 1 vote, Ross got 1 vote, Anthony got 2 votes, but Johnny got 12 votes, which meant he was banished from the game. In the end, Johnny revealed that he was a faithful, everyone was a bit shocked, and you know, I think Diane just looked straight at someone as if like, oh my god, we've made like a wrong decision. Charlotte said she doesn't know where to go with anything now. Harry actually started crying as well. I guess, similarly to what Paul's doing, he wants to come across as if he's a faithful, but I guess the emotions obviously do get the better of you as well. They're both veterans, they're both kind of from military backgrounds, so it genuinely is sad. And Harry said it was difficult that he had to go against Johnny, but at the same time, you're not going to get that many people to change their vote to vote someone else, for example, and you definitely don't want them voting for Paul, because then Paul then has lost the trust in Harry. Paul then goes from the game. Miles is like, well, hang on, what do I do? Do I trust Harry or do I go against Harry? So it just becomes some weird, complicated thing. So it's easier for the 3 of them to stick together, because as a team, they can knock who they think out, who won't affect anything in the game. And then Charlie ran over to Harry and basically said, look, he still loves you, like Johnny still loves you, like it's a game at the end of the day. And I guess when he finds out Harry's a traitor, he's not going to be very happy. And then Charlie basically just said to the rest of the table, it felt like Johnny had kind of accepted defeat, like he tried to back himself up, he tried to, you know, say his piece, but he kind of at that point just knew, look, there's too many people going for me and I can't really defend myself any more than I have tried to do. And I guess he's just one of those people that outside of the round table you are more confident because you're around social situations and things like that, whereas at the round table, everyone's eyes are on everyone constantly, so you literally cannot hide, you cannot sit in the background because you will be picked up on. And then, yeah, Harry basically said that he obviously had that brotherhood connection with Johnny, and he had to betray him, and he had to keep playing in his head that obviously it's a game. And he also said that if Johnny was in the same position, if it was flipped the other way around, he would have hoped that Johnny would have done the same thing to him. Again, we don't know what would have happened because that wasn't the situation, but imagine if Johnny was in the situation that Harry was, you know, had all the votes to be eliminated. Johnny's not going to go, actually, hang on, don't vote for Harry, vote for me, I'm a traitor. He's going to go along with the herd majority there. Ross said that he was convinced that Johnny was a traitor, and he basically said, thank God I've got the shield. So, you know, he kind of, again, was a bit wrong. He was wrong in terms of he lost a friend, but also he managed to survive the night, and I don't think he said anything too questionable or too strange at the round table, so yeah, he was absolutely fine. Again, Molly was in danger, she didn't win the shield, but I don't think her name was even mentioned at all, so that's fine. But she could be a good one to get rid of because she's quiet. Diane spoke to Paul and Jasmine, and she basically said to Paul, it doesn't really look good about him, the fact that, you know, someone's got saved, someone's got banished, someone's got murdered, and he's still there. And Jasmine added, well, actually, I'm not saying this in a rude way, Paul, but why were you saved over Meg? So unless you were a traitor and you saved yourself, surely the traitors would have got rid of him because he's more popular than her, and like his like his ideology, the traitors are getting rid of the louder people. Paul is one of the louder ones. Why would you not get rid of him? Jazz was having a quick chat with Harry again, saying he was a little bit unsure why Paul came back. Johnny was in his bad list, but Paul was acting a little bit different. He's a little bit too popular, and he basically said everyone is being played by Paul, and he hopes he's not being murdered tonight. So again, Jazz was lucky with his first few conversations, talking to Jasmine and Charlie and Ross and people like that. Now he's having an indirect, actual chat one-on-one with a traitor, but I guess him and Harry are kind of on good terms, or he, you know, Harry can kind of use Jazz to get Paul out, to get him further. So Harry doesn't, I guess at this point, Harry's not really, I wouldn't know what Harry would want to do. Would he want to keep a friendship? Someone like Jazz, who, him, Jasmine, Molly, the young ones, keep all them, use all of them to attack Paul because more people are starting to think it's Paul? Or do you kind of tell Paul that Jazz thinks that Paul's a potential traitor, and then start getting the people like Jazz, Jasmine, Molly out of the game, Charlie for example as well, to kind of get Paul through to the end? So yeah, I feel like Harry's in a very 50-50 position. I don't know which way he's going to go, but it'll be very interesting because they're kind of the only two ways you can go. Either agree with everyone, go with Paul, get Paul out, disagree with everyone, let Paul kind of take them out one by one, but don't let him take control too much because then he could get you out, and Harry could be gone in a split second. Harry was discussed with the traitors straight away that he was being told information that Jazz thought he was a traitor, and Paul was like, okay, well, Jazz is definitely one to keep on the radar, but I don't actually think people are listening to him. Miles said that people are starting to look at different names now rather than the usuals. And Harry said that Johnny was obviously his number one, but he is strong enough now to get through with the rest of the traitors. And he kind of, I guess he's kind of pleading in terms of, to Paul, basically saying, look, I'm not as weak as Ash was. Johnny was my only guy that I had a connection with. Everyone else in there, yes, it'll be sad if they go, but at the same time, I know my job in this game, and my job is to be a traitor, get through with the two of them, or whoever he gets through with, and obviously go ahead and win that money. And also, we don't know if they're going to recruit another traitor later on. So we've got 3 as of now, but they could recruit someone else, or they send the invitation to recruit somebody else, and then they can reject it. So again, that would definitely solidify that that person's a faithful, because they'll have had the invitation to be a traitor, and we won't know whether they will have accepted it or not unless they obviously start telling people. Yeah. They said if they were to get rid of Diane, that would put the heat straight on Anthony, but that would be a little bit too obvious. Paul said nobody's actually called out Tracy yet, and maybe she would be the better option, because obviously Tracy's quite quiet, and you know, she's kind of, with this whole aura situation, I guess she could read people a bit better. Diane doesn't really have that kind of knowledge, but little do the rest of them know, Diane and Ross, again, have their own kind of little vibe going on. And they also said Charlotte would be a good kill, because again, she does look nervous at the round table, and she does look nervous at the breakfasts, but she's another one of those vocal ladies in the game who is just kind of there. She's observing, but she is starting to get to know different groups, so she could be an option. And they basically said at the end of the episode it was either going to be Diane, Charlotte or Tracy, the next person that they were going to get rid of from the game. Diane and Tracy, purely because I think they're in the same kind of social group. Charlotte, one of the younger ones, but she's very active, she's very, you know, she says what she means, and she's kind of talking to lots of different groups now. And Harry basically said at the end of the episode, this murder is perfect, I love this game. So that's where episode 5 ended. So either Diane, Charlotte or Tracy are not going to be coming back to breakfast. I think the most sensible thing to do would probably to be get rid of Tracy because she's quiet, or Charlotte because she's a bit too loud. But then they're going to think, well, hang on, it's definitely not Diane then, because Diane and Tracy are a little group. So I don't really know what's going to happen, but I hope you did enjoy my review to episode 5, and if you did, don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe. And until my next review, thank you for watching, and goodbye.